At our 7th anniversary gala, my husband Derek walked up to the microphone in front of 50 guests and announced he was leaving me for someone more aligned with his success. He had his new girlfriend waiting in the wings, literally. What he didn't know was that my lawyer was sitting 3 tables away, and the prenup he forgot he signed 7 years ago was about to destroy everything he'd been planning. The Harborview Grand was the kind of venue that screamed money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And a guest list of 50 people who represented Seattle's business elite. Derek had insisted on this place for our 7th anniversary party. At the time, I thought he was finally making an effort to celebrate us. Turns out, he just needed an audience. I was wearing a sapphire blue dress that I'd spent way too much money on, sitting at a table decorated with white roses and gold accents, watching my husband work the room like he was campaigning for office. Derek had always been good at that, the charm, the confidence, the way he made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the conversation. That's how he'd built Sullivan and Bennett Properties into one of Seattle's fastest-growing real estate development firms. That's also how he'd convinced me to marry him 7 years ago. The evening started normally enough. Cocktails, small talk, people congratulating us on 7 years together like it was some kind of achievement worth celebrating. My best friend Sophie was there, sitting beside me and making sarcastic comments under her breath about Derek's business partner Marcus and his third wife who looked barely old enough to rent a car. "This whole thing feels weird," Sophie whispered to me during the appetizer course. "Derek's been acting strange all night. Have you noticed?" I had noticed. He'd barely looked at me since we arrived. Every time I tried to catch his eye, he was already focused on someone else, talking to investors, laughing with colleagues, checking his phone with a smile that suggested whoever was texting him was way more interesting than his own anniversary party. Around 8:30, Derek stood up and walked to the small stage area where the venue had set up a microphone for toasts. I assumed he was going to give some speech about our marriage, maybe thank everyone for coming. Standard anniversary party stuff. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to witness an important moment in my life." Not our life. My life. Sophie grabbed my hand under the table. 7 years ago, I made a commitment, Derek continued, his voice carrying across the room with that practiced confidence he used in business presentations. "And tonight, I'm making a new one." That's when she walked out from behind the stage area. Vanessa Reed. I recognized her immediately. She was a marketing director at one of the hotel chains Derek's company had partnered with on some mixed-use development downtown. Mid-20s, blonde, wearing a red dress that was definitely chosen to make an impression. She stood beside my husband at our anniversary party, and he put his arm around her waist. The room went completely silent. "I've spent the last year realizing that I've outgrown this marriage," Derek said, looking directly at me for the first time all evening. "Natalie is a good person, but she's not who I need anymore. I need someone who matches my ambition, my vision, my level of success. Someone who understands where I'm going, not where I've been." I sat there in my expensive dress at our anniversary party and watched my husband publicly announce he was leaving me. People were staring. Some looked shocked, others uncomfortable, a few were already pulling out their phones to record this disaster. "I've already filed for divorce," Derek continued, like he was announcing a new business venture. "My lawyer has everything prepared. This marriage is over, and honestly, it's been over for a while. I'm just finally doing something about it." Vanessa was smiling. Actually smiling, like this was romantic instead of completely insane. Derek gestured toward me with the kind of dismissive wave you'd give to someone asking for spare change. "You'll be fine, Nat. You've got your little marketing job, your apartment fund. You'll land on your feet. You always do." That's when I saw Rebecca Hartwell stand up from her table near the back of the room. My attorney. The woman who'd been sitting there all evening in a charcoal gray suit, blending in perfectly with the other business professionals Derek had invited. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. I smiled. Not a sad smile, not a broken smile. A real smile that came from knowing something Derek didn't. He forgot about the prenup. The ironclad, carefully constructed prenup his father had insisted on 7 years ago. The one that protected my assets, not his. This was about to get very interesting. 7 years ago, I met Derek Sullivan at a rooftop networking event in downtown Seattle. It was one of those industry mixer things where marketing people and real estate developers pretended to care about each other's businesses while drinking overpriced wine and eating tiny appetizers that never quite filled you up. I was 26, working as a mid-level marketing coordinator at a firm that did corporate branding, and I was honestly only there because my boss thought it would be good for my professional development. Derek was 29, fresh off his first successful property flip, and wearing a confidence that made it seem like he already owned half the city. He approached me while I was standing alone near the railing, looking out at the Space Needle lit up against the night sky. "Beautiful view," he said, handing me a fresh glass of wine without being asked. "But I bet you're thinking about leaving early like everyone else here who's not actually interested in making connections." I laughed because he was right. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way," he said. Derek Sullivan. I flip buildings and pretend it's more impressive than it actually is. Natalie Morgan. I write copy for corporate websites and pretend it's more creative than it actually is. We ended up talking for 2 hours. Not about work, which was refreshing. About books, travel, the ridiculous cost of living in Seattle, whether the Mariners would ever actually win anything meaningful. He was funny, self-aware in a way that seemed genuine rather than performative, and he had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room worth his attention. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. By the end of the month, we were dating seriously. By the end of the year, I'd moved into his condo in Capitol Hill. Derek was ambitious in a way I found exciting back then. He talked about building a real estate empire, not just flipping single properties but developing entire mixed-use complexes that would transform Seattle neighborhoods. He had vision, and he made that vision sound inevitable rather than aspirational. I got swept up in it. In him. In the idea of building something together. When he proposed 2 years later at Cascadia Bistro, the upscale restaurant where we'd had our first real date, I said yes before he even finished asking. The ring was beautiful, a platinum band with a single diamond that caught light in a way that made it seem bigger than it probably was. But I didn't care about the ring. I cared about the man offering it, the future he was promising, the partnership we were supposedly creating. The wedding was smaller than Derek wanted but bigger than I needed. His parents flew in from Boston, old money types who made it clear they thought their son could do better than a marketing coordinator with student loans and a Honda Civic. His father, Richard Sullivan, was a corporate attorney who'd made his fortune in mergers and acquisitions. His mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who wore pearls to brunch and called it casual. A week before the wedding, Richard pulled me aside during the rehearsal dinner. "Natalie, you seem like a lovely girl," he said in that tone wealthy people use when they're about to say something that proves you're not actually lovely enough. "But you understand that Derek is building something significant. We need to protect what he's creating." That's when he presented the prenup. "It's standard," Richard explained, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Protects both parties. You keep what's yours, Derek keeps what's his." Very straightforward. I was 28, in love, and honestly didn't think I had anything worth protecting. My assets consisted of about $12,000 in savings, a car worth maybe $8,000, and furniture from IKEA. Derek's father made it sound so reasonable, so mature, so normal for people getting married. "You should have your own attorney review it," Richard added. "We insist on that. Everything above board." So I did. I hired Rebecca Hartwell, a family law attorney Sophie had recommended. Rebecca was in her early 40s then, sharp as hell, with a reputation for protecting her clients like a guard dog with a law degree. She read through the prenup in her office while I sat across from her, drinking coffee and trying not to feel like I was already failing at marriage before it even started. "This is actually good for you," Rebecca said finally, looking up from the documents with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Really good. Did you read Section 7? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I hadn't. It was 60 pages of legal language that made my brain hurt. Rebecca explained it to me in terms I could understand. The prenup protected premarital assets, yes. But it also established that anything acquired during the marriage would be considered joint marital property unless explicitly documented otherwise. Any business built during our marriage using joint resources, my salary, my connections, my support, would be considered shared assets subject to equitable division. His father probably had a standard template drawn up without thinking about the specifics, Rebecca said. This protects you significantly if the marriage doesn't work out. Especially if Derek builds his business during your marriage using any resources that could be considered joint contributions. The marriage is going to work out, I said, because I believe that then. I'm sure it will, Rebecca replied. But sign this. It's better protection than most people get. So I did. Derek signed it too, barely glancing at the pages, probably assuming his father had structured everything to protect the Sullivan family wealth. We got married 3 days later in a ceremony at a boutique hotel on Bainbridge Island, surrounded by people who either loved us or were there for the open bar. The first few years were good. Really good. Derek launched Sullivan and Bennett Properties with Marcus as his partner, and I threw myself into supporting that dream. I introduced him to contacts from my marketing firm, people who trusted my judgment enough to take meetings based solely on my recommendation. Those connections led to his first major commercial development deal. I was more than his wife. I was his foundation. I just didn't realize I was building something he'd eventually try to take entirely for himself. The first 3 years of our marriage, I poured everything I had into making Derek's vision a reality. And I mean everything, my time, my connections, my salary, my entire identity became wrapped up in building Sullivan and Bennett Properties into something significant. I'd wake up at 6 in the morning to make breakfast while Derek was getting ready for site visits. I'd spend my lunch breaks calling contacts from my marketing firm, setting up introductions for Derek with potential investors or property owners looking to sell. I'd come home after a full day at Apex Creative Group and immediately shift into supporting whatever crisis or opportunity Derek was dealing with that day. Nat, I need you to look at this pitch deck, he'd say, barely looking up from his laptop. The design looks amateur. Can you fix it? So I would. I'd spend hours after dinner redesigning his investor presentations, writing copy that made his development projects sound visionary instead of risky, creating brand materials that positioned Sullivan and Bennett as established players even when they were still scraping together funding for their second project. I didn't charge him for any of this. It was our business, our future, our shared dream. That's what I told myself every time I stayed up until midnight editing documents or spent my weekend attending property tours instead of doing literally anything else. My salary from Apex Creative Group became our stability fund. Derek's income in those early years was unpredictable, big checks when projects closed, then months of nothing while he waited for the next deal to come together. My steady paycheck covered our mortgage, our utilities, our groceries, our health insurance. It covered the business expenses Derek couldn't yet afford, the professional photography for property listings, the website hosting, the premium software subscriptions he insisted he needed. I tracked every expense in a shared spreadsheet. Rent, food, car payments, everything got documented and split according to what seemed fair given our income disparity. I never thought of it as my money versus his money. It was our money, our life, our partnership. The connections I provided were worth more than the financial contributions, though. My firm, Apex Creative Group, worked with half the major players in Seattle's commercial development scene. I had relationships with people Derek needed to know, the CEO of a hotel chain looking to expand in the Pacific Northwest, the director of a venture capital firm that specialized in real estate investments, the city planning commissioner who attended our office holiday parties. I introduced Derek to Michael Torres, a senior VP at Cascade Property Group who was looking for a partner on a mixed-use development in South Lake Union. That introduction led to Derek's first major commercial project, a deal that established Sullivan and Bennett as serious players instead of just another small firm flipping residential properties. I introduced him to Jennifer Park, who ran operations for a national retail chain that needed ground floor commercial space in new developments. That relationship became a pipeline of guaranteed tenants for every project Derek built over the next 5 years. I introduced him to David Okoye, whose family owned several underdeveloped lots in Capitol Hill that they'd been holding onto for decades. Derek bought 3 of those lots at below market prices because David trusted my judgment enough to take a meeting, and I vouched for Derek's vision. Every single introduction came with my reputation attached. These people trusted me, respected me, valued our professional relationships. When I told them Derek was worth their time, they believed me. And Derek took those opportunities and built something impressive with them. I never asked for credit publicly. Sullivan & Bennett was Derek's company, his name on the business cards, his face in the industry publications. I was the wife supporting her husband's dream, and I took pride in that role because I believed we were building our future together. Our condo became a staging ground for Derek's success. I decorated it carefully, selecting furniture and art that created the impression of stability and good taste. The kind of home that said Derek Sullivan was someone worth doing business with, someone who had his life together, someone who could be trusted with major investments. I hosted dinner parties for his business associates, catering meals I'd spent all day preparing, managing conversations to make sure everyone felt valued and included, playing the role of charming hostess while Derek worked the room and closed deals over wine I'd selected and desserts I'd made from scratch. I learned to read the room at those gatherings. Understanding when to participate actively in conversations about development projects and zoning regulations, and when to fade into the background so Derek could have male bonding moments with potential investors who still thought women were decorative rather than strategic. I became skilled at making Derek look good in front of people whose opinions affected his business prospects. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny, complimented wives I had nothing in common with, and pretended I didn't notice when conversations shifted to exclude me the moment they became actually interesting. Every late night Derek spent at the office, I supported. Every risky investment that made our financial situation temporarily precarious, I absorbed the stress of. Every decision that required one of us to sacrifice so the other could advance, I was the one sacrificing. I told myself this was what partnership looked like in practice. That my contributions were building our shared future even if only Derek's name was on the door. I convinced myself that supporting someone else's dream was the same as having a dream of my own. Looking back now, I can see how thoroughly I'd deceived myself. But standing in that anniversary gala, watching Derek publicly discard me like I was an expired business contract, all those years of contribution were about to become the evidence that would destroy him. The changes started about 18 months before our 7th anniversary. So gradually that I convinced myself I was imagining problems that didn't exist. Derek started coming home later. Not dramatically late at first, just 30 minutes here, an hour there. He'd walk through the door around 7:30 instead of 6:30, explaining that he'd gotten caught up in a conference call with East Coast investors or had to stay late reviewing construction permits for the Belltown project. "Sorry, babe," he'd say, kissing my forehead while barely making eye contact. "You know how it is. This business doesn't run on a 9-to-5 schedule." I did know how it was. I'd been living it alongside him for 5 years at that point. So I made dinner, kept it warm, and didn't complain when we started eating at 8 or 9 instead of together like we used to. Then the late nights became later. 8 turned into 9, 9 turned into 10, and eventually Derek was regularly walking through the door after 11 claiming he'd been showing properties to clients who could only meet after their own work hours ended. These tech executives work crazy schedules, he explained one night when he got home past midnight. I have to accommodate them if I want their business. I wanted to believe him. It was easier than confronting what the alternative might mean. His phone habits changed around the same time. The device that used to sit casually on our kitchen counter while he showered became permanently attached to his hand. Always face down on every surface. Always locked with a password I didn't know and had never asked for because asking felt like admitting I didn't trust him. When notifications came through during dinner, the increasingly rare dinners we actually ate together, Derek would glance at the screen and smile in a way that suggested whoever was texting him was more interesting than anything I had to say. "Work stuff," he'd say if I asked, which I tried not to do too often because I didn't want to be that wife. The suspicious one. The insecure one. The one who couldn't handle her husband's success. Our conversations shrank to pure logistics. Who would pick up groceries? When the mortgage payment was due? Whether we needed to call someone about the dishwasher making that weird noise. The emotional intimacy that had characterized our early years together disappeared entirely, replaced by the kind of polite distance you might maintain with a roommate whose company you tolerated but didn't particularly enjoy. I'd try to engage him in real conversation over dinner. "How's the Fremont project coming along?" I'd ask, genuinely interested because I'd been the one who'd introduced him to the property owner in the first place. "Fine," he'd say, scrolling through his phone. "Moving forward. Did Michael Torres get back to you about that partnership opportunity?" "Yep." That was it. Just, yep. No details, no sharing, no treating me like a partner in the business I'd helped him build. The physical intimacy followed the same declining trajectory. What had once been frequent became occasional, then rare, then essentially non-existent. When I tried to initiate any kind of connection, Derek cited exhaustion from work stress. "I'm just really tired, Nat," he'd say, turning away from me in bed. "This Belltown deal is taking everything out of me mentally. Can we just sleep?" So we'd sleep. In the same bed, barely touching, existing in parallel rather than together. I made excuses to myself constantly. Successful marriages required weathering difficult seasons. Ambitious men sometimes became consumed by work in ways that temporarily diminished their capacity for emotional connection. My role as a supportive partner meant giving Derek the space he needed to focus on building the business that would eventually benefit us both. I made the same excuses to Sophie when she started asking uncomfortable questions. "You guys seem distant," she said one Saturday when we met for brunch at our usual spot in Capitol Hill. "Like, really distant. When was the last time you actually did something together that wasn't work-related?" I couldn't remember. That should have been alarming, but instead I just felt defensive. "He's building something important," I said, stabbing at my eggs Benedict without actually eating. "It takes time and focus." "We're fine." "Are you though?" Sophie asked gently. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're married to someone who barely acknowledges your existence anymore." "You don't understand what it takes to build a business," I said, knowing even as I spoke that I sounded like I was trying to convince myself more than her. Sophie let it drop, but I could see the concern in her expression. The same concern I was trying desperately not to feel myself. I noticed other things too, small details that didn't quite add up. Charges on our credit card statements for restaurants I'd never been to. Weekend site visits to properties in neighborhoods that didn't match any projects I knew Derek was working on. The faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts when I did laundry, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't mine. I convinced myself there were reasonable explanations for everything. Client dinners at restaurants I hadn't heard of. Properties he was scouting for future development. Perfume from standing too close to female colleagues in crowded elevators or conference rooms. I was so determined to believe my marriage was fundamentally sound that I ignored every signal suggesting otherwise. Every late night, every distant conversation, every moment when Derek looked at his phone with more affection than he'd shown me in months. I didn't want to see what was actually happening. So I just didn't look. The cracks became harder to ignore about 6 months before the anniversary party. What had been subtle distance transformed into something more obvious, more deliberate, more like Derek was actively creating space between us rather than just drifting naturally. He started going to the gym. Not occasionally, but religiously. 5 days a week, sometimes 6, always at this expensive boutique fitness club downtown called Elevation that cost $300 a month for membership. "I need to take better care of myself," he explained when I asked about the sudden dedication to fitness. "All the stress from work, I need an outlet. Plus, a lot of potential clients work out there. Good networking opportunity." The networking excuse made sense on the surface. Derek had always been strategic about where he spent time and who he spent it with. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing the explanation before I even asked. He started dressing differently too. New suits that fit better than his old ones, tailored specifically to show off the physique he was building at his expensive gym. Designer shirts I didn't remember him buying. A watch that definitely cost more than we'd agreed to spend on personal items without discussing it first. Marcus convinced me we need to look the part if we want to attract bigger investors, Derek said when I commented on the new wardrobe. Image matters in this business, Nat. You know that. I did know that. I'd been the one styling our home and our dinner parties to project exactly the right image for years. But something about Derek's sudden concern with his appearance felt less about business and more about something, or someone, else. The weekend work emergencies increased dramatically. Saturday mornings when Derek used to sleep in became early departures for property tours that took all day. Sunday afternoons turned into emergency investor meetings that couldn't wait until Monday. This is just how it is right now, he'd say, grabbing his keys and heading out the door before I could ask follow-up questions. We're closing 3 major deals simultaneously. It's temporary. Except it didn't feel temporary. It felt permanent, like this was just our life now, me sitting alone in our condo while Derek was perpetually somewhere else doing something more important than spending time with his wife. I started paying closer attention to our credit card statements. Not because I was actively suspicious yet, but because I was managing our household finances and noticed patterns that seemed odd. Charges at the Pinnacle Hotel appeared multiple times. Always on Thursday afternoons. Always for amounts that suggested room service or bar tabs rather than just coffee meetings in the lobby. When I asked Derek about them, he barely looked up from his laptop. Meeting space, he said. They have these executive suites we rent for private investor presentations. More impressive than our office conference room. That explanation might have made sense except that Sullivan and Bennett had recently renovated their office specifically to have impressive spaces for client meetings. Derek had spent $20,000 on that renovation 6 months ago, money that came partially from our joint savings. I found receipts in his car, expensive dinners at Canlis and the Walrus and the Carpenter, places we used to go for special occasions but hadn't been to together in over a year. When I asked if he'd taken clients there, Derek got defensive. Why are you going through my car? He snapped. Jesus, Nat, do I need to explain every business dinner to you now? The defensiveness was new. Before, Derek had been happy to share details about his work. Now, every question felt like an accusation to him, which made me feel guilty for asking even though I had every right to know where our money was going. His schedule became increasingly vague. When I'd ask what time he'd be home, I'd get non-answers. Depends on how the meeting goes. Not sure yet, I'll text you. Don't wait up. He stopped texting updates during the day. We used to message constantly, funny observations, quick check-ins, random thoughts that didn't warrant phone calls but maintained connection throughout the day. That stopped entirely. My texts went unanswered for hours, and when Derek finally responded, it was always brief and distracted. Me, how's your day going? Derek, busy. Me, want to try that new Italian place tonight? Derek, can't. Working late. Me, I miss you. Derek, no response. I started noticing how Derek acted at the few social events we still attended together. We'd arrive at industry functions or dinner parties with friends, and within 10 minutes Derek would be on the opposite side of the room from me. Not just physically distant, but actively avoiding me, like being seen with his wife was somehow embarrassing or limiting his options to network. When I'd approach him during these events to join conversations, I'd catch this flash of annoyance on his face before he'd quickly mask it with a polite smile. Hey babe, he'd say with forced affection, immediately turning back to whoever he'd been talking to before I interrupted. Sophie noticed it too. After a charity fundraiser where Derek had literally walked away mid-conversation when I tried to tell him something, she pulled me aside in the bathroom. Natalie, that was fucked up, she said bluntly. The way he just dismissed you in front of everyone? That's not normal. That's not okay. He was networking, I defended weakly. Important conversation about a potential development deal. He was being an asshole to his wife, Sophie corrected. And you're making excuses for him again. She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. The discovery happened 3 months before the anniversary party, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other Tuesday had for the past year, with Derek leaving early and me getting ready for work alone. He'd gotten up at 5:30, claiming he had an early breakfast meeting with potential investors from California who were only in town for the day. I'd heard him shower, get dressed in the dark, and leave while I was still in bed pretending to sleep because our mornings had become so awkward that pretending felt easier than interacting. I got up around 7, made coffee, and went through my usual routine. I was standing at the kitchen counter checking emails on my phone when I noticed Derek's iPad sitting on the dining room table. He'd left it behind, which was unusual because he normally took it everywhere. It had all his property listings and development plans loaded on it. I picked it up, thinking I'd text him to let him know he'd forgotten it. That's when I saw it was still unlocked, open to his Messages app. I should have just closed it. Should have respected his privacy and texted him about the forgotten device. But a notification popped up at the top of the screen while I was holding it, and I read it before I could stop myself. Last night was amazing. Can't wait for Thursday. V. Short, familiar. The kind of initial you use for someone whose name you type so often that shortcuts become automatic. My hands were shaking as I opened the full message thread. I told myself I'd just glance, just confirm that this was work-related, just prove to myself that my suspicions were paranoid and unfounded. But it wasn't work-related. The messages went back 11 months. Almost a year of conversations that made it absolutely clear my husband was having an affair. Missing you already, from someone named Vanessa Reed. That thing you did last night should be illegal, from Derek. Can't focus on work when I'm thinking about Thursday, from Vanessa. Counting down the hours, gorgeous, from Derek. I sat down at the dining room table because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I kept scrolling, each message worse than the last, watching my marriage disintegrate with every swipe of my finger. There were photos. Not explicit ones, thankfully, but intimate enough. Vanessa in Derek's shirt that I recognized from our closet, Derek and Vanessa at restaurants I'd wanted to try but he'd always been too busy to take me to, the two of them on what looked like a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands that Derek had told me was a solo retreat to clear his head. The conversations were worse than the photos. They had inside jokes and pet names and references to experiences I knew nothing about. Derek called her V or Babe or sometimes Sunshine. She called him D or My Future or devastatingly, the man I should have met first. They talked about their relationship like it was serious, established, meaningful. Not a fling or a mistake, but an actual partnership that had been running parallel to my marriage for almost a year. I hate hiding this, Vanessa wrote in a message from 2 months ago. I want to be able to touch you in public without worrying who's watching. Soon, Derek had replied. After the anniversary thing is handled, everything changes. No more hiding, no more pretending. Just us building the life we've been planning. The anniversary thing. He was referring to our marriage, 7 years together, as a thing to be handled before moving on to his real life with someone else. I found messages about specific dates, coordinated schedules, plans made around times when Derek had told me he was working late or meeting with clients. Thursday afternoons at the Pinnacle Hotel. Weekend site visits that were actually romantic getaways. Business dinners that were just dinners with his mistress at places he'd claimed were too expensive for us to casually visit. Every lie I'd accepted, every excuse I'd believed, every moment I'd felt crazy for being suspicious, it was all there, documented in painfully explicit detail. I found calendar invites he'd sent her. Shared appointments that showed a pattern of deception stretching back through almost a year of our marriage. Lunch meetings every Tuesday and Thursday that definitely weren't business-related based on the messages that followed them. Evening meetups on Thursdays when he told me he had networking events with other real estate professionals. Then I found the worst part. A shared note titled Our Future that contained plans for after the divorce. Properties they wanted to buy together. Travel destinations they'd visit. Even names they liked for future kids. They'd been planning an entire life together while I was planning our anniversary party. I sat at that dining room table for an hour, reading through months of conversations, looking at photos that proved my husband had an entire relationship I knew nothing about, processing the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my marriage. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Forgot my iPad. Can you drop it off at the office later? I stared at that message for a long time. He had no idea I'd seen everything. No clue that his forgotten device had just revealed months of systematic deception. My first instinct was to call him immediately, to scream, to demand explanations, to force him to acknowledge what he'd been doing. But something stopped me. Some survival instinct that recognized anger without strategy was just noise. I took photos of everything instead. Every message, every photo, every calendar entry, every piece of evidence showing the affair that had been happening while I was supporting Derek's business and maintaining our home and believing we were partners building a future together. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud account Derek didn't know existed. Then I closed the iPad, left it exactly where I'd found it, and called in sick to work. I needed a lawyer. And I needed one who knew exactly what to do with a prenup that Derek had signed 7 years ago and apparently completely forgotten about. I didn't drop Derek's iPad off at his office like he'd asked. Instead, I texted back saying I had a work emergency and couldn't make it downtown, that he'd have to survive without it for one day. He responded with an annoyed emoji but didn't push back, probably because he was too busy with Vanessa to care much about the inconvenience. I spent that Tuesday sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot, hyperventilating into a paper bag I'd found in the glove compartment, trying to process what I discovered while also trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. My hands kept shaking. My mind kept replaying specific messages, specific photos, specific lies that now had concrete evidence attached to them. Every working late and client dinner and property tour was now permanently recontextualized as time Derek spent building a relationship with someone else while I waited at home believing his excuses. I called Sophie first. She answered on the second ring, immediately concerned because I never called during work hours. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You sound terrible." "He's having an affair," I said, my voice surprisingly steady considering how completely I was falling apart internally. "I found messages. Lots of them. It's been going on for almost a year." Sophie was silent for 3 long seconds. Then, "I'm coming to get you." "Where are you?" "I'm fine, I'm in my car. I need to think. I need to figure out what to do." "What you do is get a lawyer," Sophie said firmly. "Like, immediately. Today. Before you do anything else, before you confront him, before you make any decisions about what happens next." "I have a lawyer," I said, remembering suddenly. "Rebecca Hartwell. She reviewed our prenup before we got married. Do you think she'd remember me?" "Call her right now," Sophie commanded. "Natalie, I'm serious. Hang up with me and call her immediately. Don't talk to Derek, don't do anything until you've talked to a lawyer who can tell you what your options are." I looked up Rebecca Hartwell's number on my phone, hands still shaking as I scrolled through old contacts I hadn't thought about in 7 years. Her office was still in the same building downtown, the Columbia Tower on the 23rd floor. I called. A receptionist answered with practiced professionalism. "I need to speak with Rebecca Hartwell," I said. "It's urgent. My name is Natalie Morgan, well, Natalie Sullivan now. She helped me with a prenup review 7 years ago and I need help." "Can I ask what this is regarding?" the receptionist asked gently, probably hearing the barely controlled panic in my voice. "Divorce," I said. The word felt strange coming out of my mouth, like admitting something I hadn't fully accepted yet. "My husband is having an affair and I need to know what my options are." "Hold please." I sat in my car listening to hold music for what felt like hours but was probably 90 seconds. Then Rebecca's voice came through the line, professional but warm in a way I remembered from our first meeting. "Natalie," she said. "I remember you. What's going on?" I told her everything. The gradual distance, the mounting suspicions, the messages I'd found that morning documenting almost a year of systematic deception. I told her about the prenup her father had insisted on, about how I'd spent 7 years building Derek's business with my connections and my salary and my complete support. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you still have the evidence from this morning?" she asked. "Photos of everything. Uploaded to a secure cloud account." "Good. That's good. Natalie, I need you to come to my office right now." "Can you do that? Are you safe to drive?" "I think so." "Come now. Don't talk to your husband, don't confront him, don't tell him you know anything. Just come to my office and we're going to figure out exactly how to handle this." I drove downtown in a daze, parking in the Columbia Tower garage and taking the elevator to the 23rd floor like I was moving through a dream where nothing felt quite real. Rebecca's office was exactly as I remembered it, organized to the point of intimidating, law degrees on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. She was older now, her hair graying at the temples, but she had the same sharp intelligence in her eyes that had made me trust her 7 years ago. She gestured me to sit in her conference room and pulled out a legal pad. "Show me everything," she said simply. I opened my phone and walked her through the screenshots. The messages, the photos, the calendar entries, the shared note about their future together. Rebecca took notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking questions about dates or specific details. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me with an expression that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and predatory. "Your husband is about to have a very bad day," she said. "Actually, a very bad several months. Maybe years." "Because of the affair?" I asked. "Because of the prenup," Rebecca corrected. "Natalie, do you remember what we discussed 7 years ago about that document?" I shook my head. "Not really. I remember you said it was good for me, but I honestly didn't understand all the legal language." Rebecca smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just been handed a gift. "Let me explain what your husband's father accidentally did when he drew up that prenup," she said. "And why Derek is about to realize that forgetting about this document was the biggest mistake of his life." Rebecca spread the prenup across her conference table like she was revealing a treasure map. 7 years old, 63 pages of dense legal language that I'd signed without fully understanding because I'd been 28 and in love and convinced none of it would ever matter. "Your father-in-law is a corporate attorney," Rebecca said, tapping a specific section with her pen. "Which means he's very good at mergers and acquisitions, but apparently not very good at family law. He used a standard template without customizing it for your specific situation." "Is that bad?" I asked. "For Derek? Catastrophically bad. For you? This is the best protection you could have possibly gotten." She walked me through the sections that mattered, translating legal language into terms I could actually understand. The prenup protected premarital assets, which meant Derek kept whatever he had before we got married, and I kept my basically nothing. But Section 7, the section Rebecca had flagged 7 years ago, established that anything acquired during the marriage would be considered joint marital property unless explicitly documented otherwise in writing and agreed to by both parties. "That includes businesses," Rebecca explained. "Sullivan and Bennett Properties was founded 2 years into your marriage, correct?" "Yes. Derek and Marcus started it together about 5 years ago." "Using what resources?" I thought about it. My salary covered our living expenses for the first 2 years while they were getting established. I introduced Derek to most of his early investors and clients. I helped with marketing materials, pitch decks, branding, all of that. We used our home equity for business loans. Rebecca was writing everything down, her handwriting getting faster as I talked. "And you have documentation of this? Bank statements showing your salary covering household expenses? Emails introducing Derek to contacts? Any records of your contributions to the business?" "I tracked everything in a shared spreadsheet," I said. "Every expense, every bill, who paid what. I have 7 years of financial records showing exactly how we split costs and what I contributed." "Perfect. And the business loans using home equity, was that disclosed to you?" "Some of them. Derek would tell me we were using the house as collateral and I'd sign whatever documents he needed. I trusted him. Rebecca's expression darkened slightly. How many times would you estimate this happened? 3, maybe 4 times over the years. And you still have those loan documents? They should be in our home office filing cabinet. Rebecca made another note. We're going to need copies of everything. Every bank statement, every tax return, every document showing your financial contributions to the household and Derek's business. Every email where you introduced him to contacts. Every piece of evidence that proves you weren't just his wife, but his business partner in everything but title. She explained what the prenup actually meant in practice. Because Sullivan and Bennett Properties was built during our marriage using joint resources, my salary, my connections, our shared home equity, it was considered a marital asset. Not Derek's business. Our business. The prenup your father-in-law drew up actually entitles you to 50% of the business value, Rebecca said. Or an equivalent cash settlement if the business can't be split. Plus 50% of all other marital assets, retirement accounts, investment portfolios, property equity, everything accumulated during the marriage. I stared at her. Derek thinks he's going to leave me with nothing. He told Vanessa in one of his messages that I'd be fine with my little marketing job and whatever I'd saved. Derek is wrong, Rebecca said flatly. Spectacularly, devastatingly wrong. The prenup he signed protects you in ways he clearly never bothered to understand. Add in the affair, which is documented infidelity, and we have grounds to argue he dissipated marital assets by spending joint funds on his mistress. She pulled up a calculator on her laptop. Based on what you're telling me about the business value and your financial contributions, you're looking at a settlement in the range of $2 to $3 million. Possibly more once we conduct full asset discovery. The number was so large it didn't feel real. How is that possible? Because Derek built Sullivan and Bennett Properties on your foundation, Rebecca said. Your salary, your connections, your support, your shared home equity. Under Washington state law and the terms of this prenup, that makes you entitled to half of everything that business is worth. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca assembled a team. James Fletcher, a forensic accountant who specialized in business valuations, began tracing Derek's financial records. Caroline Wright, a private investigator Rebecca had worked with on dozens of divorce cases, started documenting Derek and Vanessa's movements. I continued living with Derek like nothing had changed. Coming home every evening, making dinner, asking about his day with fake interest while he gave me distracted one-word answers. Sleeping in the same bed as someone who was actively planning to leave me for someone else. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every morning I woke up next to Derek, knowing what I knew, having to pretend I was still the oblivious wife who believed his lies. Every evening watching him text Vanessa while sitting 3 feet away from me on the couch, smiling at his phone in a way he hadn't smiled at me in over a year. Sophie called me every day to check in, make sure I wasn't losing my mind from the stress of maintaining this performance. How are you doing this? She asked one night when I called her from my car after leaving the grocery store, needing a moment before going home to face Derek. I don't know, I admitted. I just keep thinking about that moment when he realizes what's about to happen to him. That's what keeps me going. James Fletcher discovered Derek had been transferring money from business accounts into personal investment portfolios that only had his name on them. Not enormous amounts that would trigger immediate suspicion, but systematic transfers of $20,000 to $30,000 at a time over the past 2 years. He's been preparing for this divorce longer than you realized, James told me during one of our meetings at Rebecca's office. These transfers suggest he's been planning his exit strategy for at least 18 months. Caroline Wright brought back photos and video that made the affair impossible to deny. Derek and Vanessa having lunch at upscale restaurants, holding hands across tables. The two of them entering the Pinnacle Hotel on Thursday afternoons and emerging hours later. A weekend trip to Whistler that Derek had told me was a business retreat with Marcus, except Marcus had been in Seattle that whole weekend posting on social media about watching his kids' soccer tournament. Your husband is sloppy, Caroline said, spreading photos across Rebecca's conference table. Either he's gotten too comfortable or he genuinely doesn't think you're paying attention. Either way, he's left a trail that's impossible to dispute. 3 weeks into building our case, Rebecca called me into her office for what she described as a strategic planning session. "Derek sent out invitations for your anniversary party," she said. 50 guests, the Harborview Grand, formal event. This isn't about celebrating your marriage, Natalie. This is theater. I'd received the invitation too, forwarded to me by Sophie who'd gotten hers in the mail. I hadn't been consulted about the guest list or the venue or any of the planning. Derek had organized our entire anniversary celebration without involving me at all. "He's going to do something public," Rebecca continued. "The expensive venue, the large guest list heavy with business associates, the formal nature of the event. Men like Derek don't just leave quietly. They want their decision witnessed and validated. So what do we do?" Rebecca smiled that predatory smile I was getting used to seeing. "We let him perform exactly as he's planned. And then we respond with something he never saw coming." The final 2 weeks before the anniversary party moved with this strange quality where time felt both impossibly slow and way too fast. Every day brought me closer to the confrontation I'd been preparing for, while also stretching out in this excruciating performance where I had to pretend everything was normal. Derek was in an unusually good mood during those last weeks. He came home earlier some evenings, almost cheerful in a way I hadn't seen in months. He was excited about something, confident, like someone about to execute a plan he believed would work perfectly. "The anniversary party is going to be special," he said one night over dinner, one of the rare dinners we actually ate together. "Really memorable. I think you'll be surprised." "I'm sure it will be," I said, keeping my voice neutral while my stomach twisted into knots. "It was thoughtful of you to plan something." He looked at me then with this expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe guilt, maybe anticipation, maybe just the uncomfortable awareness that he was sitting across from someone whose life he was about to destroy and she had no idea it was coming. The expression disappeared quickly, replaced by the confident mask he'd been wearing for months. Rebecca had prepared everything we needed. Legal documents ready to be filed immediately when the time came. Evidence packages organized by category, financial records showing my contributions to Derek's business, documentation of the affair with dates and locations, analysis of asset dissipation where Derek had spent joint funds on Vanessa. "When he makes his move," Rebecca said during one of our final strategy sessions, "we respond immediately. Not with emotion, with documentation. We let him announce whatever he's planned, then we show everyone in that room exactly who Derek Sullivan actually is." She'd coordinated with James and Caroline to ensure we had comprehensive evidence of everything Derek had done. Bank statements showing systematic transfers of assets. Business valuations proving Sullivan and Bennett Properties was worth significantly more than Derek had been claiming on our tax returns. Video footage and photographs of the affair that left no room for Derek to claim I was exaggerating or lying. "The key is staying calm," Rebecca advised. "Let him think he's in control right up until the moment you take that control away completely." Sophie came over the Thursday before the party, ostensibly to help me pick out a dress but really to make sure I wasn't having a complete breakdown from the stress of living this double life. "How are you not losing your mind?" she asked, watching me try on the sapphire blue dress I'd eventually wear to the gala. I would have cracked weeks ago. Would have thrown his laptop through a window or set his car on fire or something equally satisfying and illegal. "I'm channeling everything into this moment," I admitted. "Every time I want to scream at him or confront him or just stop pretending, I think about Sunday night. About watching him realize what's about to happen. That's what keeps me going." The dress fit perfectly. Sophisticated, elegant, the kind of thing that said I deserved respect rather than public humiliation. Sophie nodded her approval. "You're going to look amazing when you destroy him," she said. "That's important. Never let them see you looking anything less than incredible when you're burning their life down." Friday evening, Derek came home early again. He poured bourbon for both of us without being asked and actually sat with me in our living room instead of disappearing into his office or claiming he had work to do. "I've been thinking about us," he said after several minutes of uncomfortable silence. I waited, letting him fill the quiet with whatever carefully prepared speech he'd been rehearsing. "Things have been difficult," he continued. "I know that. I know I've been distant. But change can be good, you know? Sometimes people need change to grow, to become who they're really meant to be. His words were deliberately vague, constructed to mean anything depending on how you chose to interpret them. I played along because that's what the moment required. Change can be good, I agreed, taking a sip of bourbon I didn't really want. Sunday will definitely be memorable. We sat there for another hour having the most extended conversation we'd shared in months. Every word Derek spoke was performance. Every response I gave was calculated. Two people speaking entirely different languages while pretending perfect understanding. Derek went to bed before me, claiming he wanted to be well rested for the big day. I sat alone in our living room with my bourbon, thinking about how this would be one of the last nights he'd sleep in this condo as my husband. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Everything is ready. Caroline will be positioned at the venue early to document everything. I'll be there as your guest. Remember, stay calm, let him go first, then we execute exactly as planned. I texted back, I'm ready. But I wasn't sure that was true. You can prepare for a confrontation intellectually, gather all the evidence, plan every move strategically. But emotionally? I didn't know if anyone could really be ready to watch their marriage end in front of 50 witnesses while their husband stood next to his mistress. Saturday was worse than Friday. Derek spent most of the day out, claiming last-minute preparations for the party, though I suspected he was with Vanessa coordinating whatever performance they'd planned. He came home late afternoon to shower and change, passing me in the hallway with barely a word. I'm heading to the venue early to make sure everything's set up properly, he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. You can meet me there around 7. He didn't offer to arrive together. Didn't suggest we share this moment as a couple. Just expected me to show up to my own anniversary party alone while he was already there doing who knows what with who knows who. Sounds good, I said with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. I'll see you there. Derek left. I stood in our bedroom watching him go, this man I'd spent 7 years supporting and building up and sacrificing for. In a few hours, he was going to publicly announce he was done with me, that I wasn't good enough for the successful version of himself he'd become. What he didn't know was that the successful version of himself only existed because of me. And the prenup he'd forgotten about was going to prove exactly that in front of everyone who mattered to his business and reputation. I took a long shower, did my makeup carefully, put on the sapphire blue dress that made me look powerful rather than decorative. I checked my phone one final time, messages from Rebecca confirming she was already at the venue, from Sophie saying she was on her way, from Caroline saying everything was in position. Then I drove to the Harborview Grand alone, parked in the garage, and stood outside the building for a moment looking up at the glass facade reflecting the sunset. This was it. The moment everything I'd been planning for 3 months would either work perfectly or fall apart spectacularly. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and walked through those doors with my head high. The Harborview Grand was even more stunning than the photos online suggested. The entire space was glass and steel and elegant lighting, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Elliott Bay at sunset. The water reflected amber and rose gold across the horizon, creating this backdrop that would have been romantic under different circumstances. 50 guests were already mingling when I arrived. Derek's business associates dominated the crowd, developers and investors and city officials I recognized from various work functions over the years. A few mutual friends had shown up, people who would soon need to choose sides in whatever aftermath followed tonight. Sophie was already there, positioned near the head table with a clear view of the entire room. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Rebecca stood near the bar talking to someone I didn't recognize, playing her role as my friend from yoga class perfectly. She was wearing a navy suit that somehow managed to look both professional and casual enough to blend in with the other guests. Then I saw them. Derek was near the entrance to the main dining area, greeting guests as they arrived. And beside him, like she had every right to be there, was Vanessa Reed. She wore red. A designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, perfectly tailored to show off a figure she'd apparently been maintaining at the same gym where Derek spent all his time. Her blonde hair was styled in waves that looked effortless but had definitely required professional help. Her makeup was flawless, Instagram ready, perfect for whatever photographic evidence Derek expected this evening to generate. They looked like success. Like youth. Like everything I apparently wasn't in Derek's estimation of what he deserved. The audacity of bringing her here, to our anniversary party, was breathtaking. Having her stand beside him as some kind of co-host at an event supposedly celebrating our marriage took a level of arrogance I hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. Derek saw me approaching. His expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to identify: surprise, guilt, maybe just discomfort at seeing his wife when he was standing next to his mistress. "Natalie," he said, my name sounding awkward in his mouth. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied with perfect politeness, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "The venue is stunning. You really outdid yourself with the planning." I turned to Vanessa and extended my hand with the same gracious courtesy I'd show any hostess. "I don't think we've been formally introduced. I'm Natalie." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Vanessa. It's lovely to finally meet you properly." Finally. Like we'd been circling each other for years instead of her sleeping with my husband for 11 months while I had no idea she existed. "Lovely to meet you too," I said, releasing her hand and moving past them into the main space before either could see anything in my expression beyond polite friendliness. The room was filling rapidly. Marcus Bennett had arrived with his young wife. Several investors Derek had been courting for his latest development project. City council members who could influence zoning decisions. Everyone who mattered to Derek's business success had been invited to witness whatever he had planned. Dinner started at 7:30. We were seated at a long table positioned for maximum visibility in the center of the room. 50 guests arranged in seating that separated me from Derek by the entire table's length. I sat at one end like a guest at my own anniversary celebration while Derek held court at the other end with Vanessa beside him. Her hand kept touching his arm throughout the meal. Small gestures of proprietary familiarity that several guests noticed and looked uncomfortable about. You could feel the tension building in the room, people sensing something was off but not quite sure what was happening or how they were supposed to react. The food was expensive and beautiful. 5 courses of tiny portions arranged like edible art. I couldn't taste any of it. My entire focus was on Derek, on waiting for whatever performance was coming, on preparing myself to execute the response Rebecca and I had planned. Conversations around me were superficial. Business talk, observations about the view, compliments on the floral arrangements. I participated with engagement that looked normal while my mind ran through every step of what was about to happen. Between the 4th and 5th courses, I noticed Sophie subtly position her phone on the table, screen facing toward Derek's end of the room. Recording mode activated, though the angle looked casual enough that nobody would question it. Rebecca did the same from her position several seats down, both phones capturing different angles of whatever was about to unfold. Then Derek stood. The room went quiet immediately. That kind of automatic attention successful men command without effort, everyone turning to look at him standing there in his expensive suit with his mistress beside him. "Thank you all for celebrating this special evening with us," he began, his voice carrying across the space with practiced confidence. Every word was precisely delivered, clearly rehearsed multiple times. 7 years ago, I made a commitment to Natalie. Tonight, I want to be honest about where that commitment has brought me. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The atmosphere was changing, people beginning to sense this wasn't a typical anniversary toast. "Marriage teaches you what you really need," Derek continued, looking directly at me across the length of the table. "What you're willing to accept versus what you actually deserve. Natalie has been supportive and reliable throughout our marriage. She's been exactly what I expected when we started this journey together." He made those qualities sound like criticism. Like I'd somehow disappointed him by being exactly what a partner should be. "But I've grown beyond where I was 7 years ago," he said. "My business has expanded. My vision has evolved. And I've found someone who matches where I am now, not where I was then." He gestured to Vanessa, who was looking at him with undisguised adoration. "I'm filing for divorce," Derek announced. "Actually, I've already filed." The papers were processed last week. This marriage is over, and I think we all know it's been over for a while. I'm just finally being honest about it." Gasps rippled through the room. Several people pulled out their phones, starting to record this disaster unfolding in real time. Derek looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You'll be fine, Nat. You've got your marketing career, your savings. You'll land on your feet. You always do. But I need more than fine. I need extraordinary. And Vanessa is extraordinary." Vanessa was actually smiling. Like this was romantic instead of absolutely insane. Nervous laughter started somewhere in the room. A few of Derek's business associates joined in, probably not knowing how else to react to this bizarre public humiliation they'd just witnessed. I looked at the 50 guests, at Derek's face glowing with triumph, at Vanessa standing beside him like a prize he'd just won. Then I smiled. Not a sad smile or a broken smile. Something genuine that came from a place of calm certainty. The laughter faltered. Derek's expression flickered with confusion because this wasn't the script he'd written. I was supposed to cry, to beg, to make a scene that validated his decision and made him look like the reasonable party finally escaping an inadequate wife. I stood slowly, smoothing the sapphire silk of my dress with deliberate care. "Thank you, Derek," I said quietly. But in the silence that had fallen over the room, my voice carried perfectly to every corner. "Truly, thank you for making this so easy." Derek's confidence wavered visibly. This wasn't the response he'd anticipated. The room had gone from nervous laughter to complete silence, everyone watching to see what would happen next. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded document. The prenup. All 63 pages of it, printed fresh this morning by Rebecca's paralegal with key sections highlighted in yellow. "Since we're sharing important documents tonight," I said, my voice steady and carrying across the room with unexpected authority, "I thought I should share one too. A little anniversary gift of my own." I held up the prenup so everyone could see it. Several guests leaned forward, curious about what I was holding. 7 years ago, Derek's father insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement before getting married, I continued. Richard Sullivan is a corporate attorney, very successful, very thorough. Or at least, he thought he was thorough. Derek's face had gone pale. I could see him trying to remember the details of a document he'd signed 7 years ago and apparently never thought about again. "I didn't really understand this prenup when I signed it," I admitted. "I was 28, in love, and I had basically nothing worth protecting." Derek's father made it sound so reasonable. "You keep what's yours, I keep what's mine," very straightforward. I walked slowly toward Derek's end of the table, holding the prenup in my hand like evidence in a trial. But then I had my own attorney review it. Rebecca Hartwell, who specializes in family law. I gestured toward Rebecca, who stood from her position near the bar. Several guests turned to look at her, confusion spreading across their faces as they realized my lawyer had been here all evening. Rebecca explained something very interesting about Section 7 of this prenup. Derek was trying to maintain his composure, but I could see panic starting to creep into his expression. Section 7 establishes that anything acquired during our marriage is considered joint marital property unless explicitly documented otherwise in writing and agreed to by both parties, I explained. That includes businesses. Businesses like Sullivan and Bennett Properties, which was founded 3 years into our marriage. Marcus Bennett, Derek's business partner, was staring at Derek with an expression that suggested this was news to him too. Now, Derek might argue that Sullivan and Bennett is his company, his vision, his creation, I continued. And in some ways, that's true. But let me tell you what else is true. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the venue's display screens that Derek had set up for whatever presentation he'd been planning. Instead of his content, my evidence appeared on every screen around the room. Bank statements filled the screens. 7 years of financial records showing my salary covering our household expenses while Derek built his business. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, insurance, all paid from my accounts while Derek's income went entirely into Sullivan and Bennett. For the first 3 years of the business, my marketing salary kept us afloat, I said. I paid for everything so Derek could reinvest every penny he made into growing the company. The screens changed to show emails. Introductions I'd made between Derek and contacts from my firm. Messages setting up meetings with investors, property owners, potential clients, all facilitated by my professional relationships. I introduced Derek to Michael Torres, which led to his first major commercial development deal, I said, clicking through specific emails. I introduced him to Jennifer Park, who became a guaranteed tenant pipeline for every project. I introduced him to David Okoye, whose family sold Derek 3 properties in Capitol Hill at below market prices because they trusted my judgment. More documents appeared. Loan applications using our home equity as collateral, all signed by both of us, all putting our shared property at risk for business investments. We used our home, our jointly owned home, as collateral for business loans 4 separate times, I continued. That's our shared asset financing Derek's company growth. The screens shifted to show marketing materials, pitch decks, brand guidelines, all with metadata showing they'd been created by me. I designed every piece of marketing material Sullivan and Bennett used for the first 5 years, I said. Every investor presentation, every property brochure, every piece of content that made the company look professional and established. Derek was standing completely still now, his face ashen. Vanessa looked confused, like she was trying to understand what was happening and why the evening had gone so completely off script. So when Derek talks about his business, his success, his empire, I said, what he's really talking about is our business. Built with my money, my connections, my work, our shared assets. Rebecca stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. Under the terms of the prenup Derek signed, she announced to the room, Mrs. Sullivan is entitled to 50% of Sullivan and Bennett Properties' current valuation. Or an equivalent cash settlement if the business cannot be equitably divided. She paused to let that sink in. Based on recent property appraisals and business valuations conducted by our forensic accountant, that's approximately $3.2 million. Gasps erupted around the room. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Derek's face had gone from pale to completely white. But wait, I said, holding up my hand. There's more. The screens changed again, this time showing photographs. Derek and Vanessa at restaurants. Entering hotels. On weekend trips. Every image was timestamped and geotagged, creating an undeniable timeline of their relationship. For the past 11 months, Derek has been having an affair with Vanessa Reed, I said, my voice still calm despite the rage I felt underneath. Which wouldn't be just a personal betrayal, though it obviously is that. It's also financial misconduct. More images appeared. Credit card statements showing charges at the Pinnacle Hotel, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, weekend getaways, all charged to our joint accounts. Derek spent approximately $47,000 of our joint funds on his affair, Rebecca announced. Hotel rooms, restaurants, gifts, travel. Under Washington state law, that's considered dissipation of marital assets. Spending joint money on an extramarital relationship. She smiled that predatory smile I'd gotten used to seeing. Which means Derek owes Mrs. Sullivan reimbursement for those expenditures, plus her 50% share of the business, plus her portion of all other marital assets, retirement accounts, investment portfolios, home equity. The total settlement, Rebecca continued, will be approximately $4.1 million. Plus legal fees, which Mr. Sullivan will also be covering. The room was in complete chaos now. People were talking over each other, phones were recording from every angle, Derek's business associates were rapidly calculating how this would affect their investments in Sullivan and Bennett Properties. Derek finally found his voice. You can't do this, he said, but his words carried no conviction. This is. Legal, Rebecca finished for him. Entirely legal and explicitly outlined in the prenup your father drew up. Which you signed. Which you apparently never bothered to actually read or remember. I walked up to Derek, close enough that only he and Vanessa could hear my next words. You wanted to upgrade, I said quietly. But you forgot that I was never your inferior. I was your foundation. And foundations don't disappear when you stop appreciating them. They just stop holding you up. I turned to address the room one final time. Thank you all for witnessing this, I said. Your presence makes everything documented, public, and very permanent. Then I walked out of the Harborview Grand with Rebecca and Sophie flanking me, leaving behind 50 stunned guests, a weeping mistress, and a husband whose life I just systematically demolished using nothing more than patience, evidence, and the legal document he'd forgotten existed. The glass doors of the Harborview Grand closed behind us with a soft sound that felt final. The cool Seattle evening air hit my face, and I realized I was shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from the pure adrenaline of what had just happened draining out of my system all at once. Sophie grabbed my arm immediately, steadying me. That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed, she said, her voice shaking almost as much as my hands. Natalie, that was absolutely perfect. Rebecca was already on her phone, probably fielding calls or messages, but she looked up long enough to give me an approving nod. You did beautifully. Stayed calm, delivered every line exactly right, didn't let emotion override strategy. That's how you win. We walked to the parking garage in silence. Behind us, through the venue's glass walls, I could see chaos unfolding inside. People clustered in groups, clearly discussing what they'd just witnessed. Derek was surrounded by his business associates, probably trying to do damage control that was already way too late. Vanessa had disappeared entirely, smart move on her part. I can't go home tonight, I said once we reached Sophie's car. I can't face that condo right now, can't be in that space with all of Derek's things and our life together. You're staying with me, Sophie said immediately. Already cleared out the guest room before I came to the party because I figured you wouldn't want to go back there tonight. Rebecca finished whatever she was typing and looked up. Derek will try to contact you. Probably within the hour. Angry first, accusing you of ambushing him and destroying his reputation. Then desperate, asking you to fix this somehow, to make it go away. Do not respond to anything. Every communication goes through me now. I understand. I'm serious, Natalie, Rebecca emphasized. Any direct contact with him can be used to suggest you're open to reconciliation or settlement negotiations outside proper legal channels. Let him panic. Let his attorneys scramble. We proceed exactly as planned. We drove to Sophie's apartment in Fremont, me following her taillights through streets that felt surreal after everything that had just happened. Like I was moving through a world that had fundamentally changed in the space of 30 minutes. My phone started buzzing around 9. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Social media notifications from platforms I barely used. Sophie's phone was doing the same thing, lighting up repeatedly. Natalie, Sophie said slowly, staring at her screen. The video is already online. Like, everywhere online. She turned her phone toward me. Someone had uploaded footage from the anniversary party to multiple platforms. The view counts were climbing visibly, hundreds becoming thousands becoming tens of thousands as we watched. How many people were recording? I asked. At least 20 that I could see, Sophie replied. Everyone had their phones out once Derek started his announcement. We watched in real time as the anniversary party became viral content. People were sharing it with captions like, "Woman destroys cheating husband with prenup he forgot about," and "This is how you handle betrayal," and "The most satisfying revenge I've ever seen." The comments sections filled with responses ranging from supportive to celebratory. People were praising what they called my strategic patience, mocking Derek's arrogance, celebrating the prenup twist that nobody saw coming. Someone had already edited together a highlight version. Derek's smug announcement followed immediately by my calm response and the evidence reveal. That version was spreading even faster than the full footage, set to dramatic music that made the whole thing feel like a movie scene. There are millions of views already, Sophie said, scrolling through different platforms. This is absolutely insane. By midnight, my face was everywhere. Screenshots of the moment I smiled after Derek's announcement. Clips of me explaining the prenup. Images of the evidence displayed on the venue screens. All of it being shared and reshared by people who had never met me but felt invested in my story. I turned off my phone around 1 in the morning because the notifications were overwhelming. Sophie did the same after confirming that Rebecca had everything under control and would handle any urgent matters overnight. "Try to sleep," Sophie said, hugging me tight before I went to her guest room. "Tomorrow is going to be intense." I lay in Sophie's guest bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion. My mind kept replaying the evening, Derek's face when he realized what was happening, Vanessa's confusion, the gasps from the guests, the absolute satisfaction of watching 7 years of deception collapse in real time. I felt relief. Not happiness exactly, not triumph, just this profound sense of release from a narrative I was finally finished living. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected. Derek's attorneys tried multiple approaches to minimize the settlement, arguing that the prenup shouldn't apply because circumstances had changed, claiming the business valuation was inflated, suggesting I should accept less money for a quicker resolution. Rebecca rejected every proposal with responses that grew increasingly pointed as Derek's legal team became more desperate. "Your client signed a legally binding prenup," she wrote in one particularly sharp email. "His failure to understand what he signed is not grounds to invalidate it. We will accept nothing less than the full settlement outlined by the document his own father drafted." Judge Patricia Kendall, who presided over our case, had a reputation for no-nonsense handling of complex marital disputes. She shut down Derek's attorney's arguments about prejudice from the viral video with a single sentence that Rebecca later told me she wanted to frame. "Your client destroyed his own reputation through documented fraud and public cruelty." Mrs. Sullivan simply revealed the truth. 3 months after the anniversary party, the settlement was finalized. $4.1 million, exactly as Rebecca had calculated. The house we bought together was sold, with my portion of the proceeds adding to my settlement. Derek's half of Sullivan and Bennett Properties was bought out by Marcus, who apparently wanted nothing to do with his former partner after the public disaster. I didn't keep the condo Derek and I had shared. Too many memories of a marriage that had slowly suffocated me. Instead, I used part of my settlement to buy a loft in Belltown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Pike Place Market. Smaller than the condo but entirely mine, furniture I selected, art I genuinely liked, a space that reflected my actual taste rather than carefully curated impressions for Derek's business associates. My career transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated. Apex Creative Group promoted me to Senior Creative Director 2 months after the video went viral. My boss explained that someone capable of executing such comprehensive strategic communication clearly possessed skills the company wanted to utilize and retain. The promotion came with a 60% salary increase and creative authority over major client campaigns. For the first time in 7 years, I was earning money that was unambiguously mine, unconnected to Derek's business or his constant criticism that I wasn't ambitious enough. I adopted a dog from the Seattle Humane Society. A 3-year-old golden retriever mix named Victory because Sophie suggested it and the irony was too perfect to resist. He spent his days positioned in patches of sunlight coming through my loft windows, completely uninterested in performing emotional labor for anyone's benefit. Rebecca became more than my attorney. She became a friend who understood what it meant to watch a marriage dissolve and choose reconstruction over collapse. She introduced me to other women with similar stories. Partners who'd been systematically underestimated, spouses who'd built foundations for people who forgot to appreciate them. We met monthly, this informal group of women who'd survived betrayal and chosen strategic response over emotional reaction. We shared experiences, supported each other, built community based on survival and growth rather than shared victimhood. 6 months after the anniversary party, Sophie called with news about Derek. Marcus completely restructured Sullivan and Bennett, she told me. Removed Derek's name from everything, rebranded as just Bennett Properties. Derek tried to start a new development firm but nobody wants to work with him. His reputation is completely destroyed. And Vanessa? Fired from her job the same night as the party. Last I heard, she moved back to California. Her career in Seattle hospitality is pretty much over. I felt nothing hearing this. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even the closure people talk about finding at the end of difficult chapters. Just profound indifference toward people who no longer had any power over my life. 1 year after that anniversary party, I stood in my Belltown loft with Victory curled on the couch beside me, looking out at Elliott Bay in the distance. The Harborview Grand was visible from certain angles, glass walls reflecting afternoon sunlight, the venue that had become a landmark in my personal geography. The place where I'd reclaimed my life and demonstrated that quiet patience could be more devastating than dramatic confrontation. I'd built something real from the wreckage of my marriage. Not just financial security, though the settlement had given me that. But actual freedom, the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than supporting someone else's vision, the freedom to earn recognition for my own work rather than being the invisible foundation for Derek's success. Derek had wanted to upgrade. What he'd actually done was trade partnership for performance, someone who knew him completely for someone who knew only the version he performed for public consumption. The real upgrade had been mine. From wife defined by marriage to woman defined by her own choices. From someone who absorbed criticism about inadequacy to someone who recognized that inadequacy belonged to the person delivering judgment rather than receiving it. The anniversary party video still surfaces occasionally on social media, resurfacing whenever someone compiles examples of strategic response to betrayal. I don't feel exposed by it anymore. Instead, it's become a permanent reminder that quiet people aren't weak people. They're just waiting for the right moment to demonstrate exactly how dangerous underestimation can be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.